All right, folks, here we are. It's Monday night. It's the Rec Poker podcast. We are killing it on the audio cues and having a great time like we always do. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home game, and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter and Threads while we've got those both. I've got the best freaking job in the world. Every Monday night, I get to hang out here with my friends and talk about this fantastic game of poker that we all love so much. I have to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, because we depend on their support. Because most of what we do here is free at Rec Poker. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, and we love poker. We love talking about poker. We help other people explore the game of poker. We do it on the podcast, in Discord, on our YouTube channel, on our website. Go sign up for a free account right now at rec.poker. All it takes is an email address and a smile. And you get to join the fantastic folks like the rest of the Wrecking Crew. You get used to hearing my voice on Monday nights because they let me host the podcast, but I am just one of the group, the crew, the village that it takes to make the magic happen here at Rec Poker. If you want to find out more about me or the rest of the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, but you can also just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them right here tonight, starting with producing co-host Chris Jones.
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 now on Threads, Twitter, and I just got one of those special invites that nobody gets to Blue Sky, so you can find me there too.
Wow, that's almost everywhere.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Ravman50 just about everywhere.
And I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss or in the Rec Poker home game as Gopherboy TJM.
Well, thanks, gang, for joining me here on Monday night. This is the forums edition of the podcast, and the name isn't a coincidence. We called it that because every week we take a post from our forums, one of those fantastic free resources available to all our members here at Rec Poker, and then we talk about that post on the air. So this week we are taking a look at a post from our very own Ben Enslow. He goes by Jammin96, and you can find him on Twitch most Fridays and Saturdays. He has a great time sharing his thoughts with people while he plays through the home games and a slate of other events on his poker calendar. Ben's been a member for a long time. It's great to have him on the Wrecking Crew. And his question for the group tonight is about ICM in big fields. So I'll just go through the post and we can sort of talk about what interests us and some interesting strategic elements here. So he writes, our correspondent writes, quick general strat question. 15 big blinds, it folds to us in middle position. We're 10 from the money in a $30 buy-in with a player field of over 2,000 players. Do we min raise or do we shove if we open? Should we open? What do our ranges look like? If we open and get shoved on, what's our calling range if we're covered? And what are the factors that we might consider when answering some of these questions? So I know Taylor, Chris, and Rob have some thoughts to share, but I'm just going to jump into a couple of the replies here in the Rec Poker Forum. Although I do encourage folks, I'm going to put the link to this post in the show notes. If you just click that button on your phone or wherever you're listening to this right now, you'll be able to follow along and check out all the great responses. We kind of scratch the surface here on the air. But if you really want to get into the meat of it, you should go check out the free forums at rec.poker. You don't even have to be a member to view them. Just click on the link and you can see what's up. So the real question is sort of, what's our standard line when we have 15 big blinds in a spot like this? What do our ranges look like? So we got a great response from Eric Binkley-Gin, another Wrecking Crew member, says, I did some quick calculations to get a better feel of the situation. Assuming 2,500 players and 15% get paid, that means that 375 or so get into the money. So if we're 10 away, that would be about 2.7% of the remaining field. And that makes it a very high ICM spot where we're incentivized to play extremely tight. And this is a great point because the number of players left to bust is sort of a relative, it's a number that's relative to the total number of players in the tournament. Like you always want to be closer to the bubble, and the closer to the bubble that you are, the more ICM aware you have to be. But in some very, very large field tournaments, you could feel that pressure with more players to bust than you would in a smaller field tournament. Eric says, I think it's valuable to know more. where does our 15 big blind stack put us relative to the field? Are we in the top 20%, right in the middle, bottom 20%? And how short are the shortest stacks? Ben responds, I don't have the exact numbers, but let's say we're in the bottom 20% of the field in stack size and lots of short stacks under 10 big blinds. We have another comment here from Keith Monkey System Brandt, who says that he agrees with Eric. We need to know our stack size relative to the whole field. And he makes this point that we also need to know the stack sizes of the players left to act pre-flop and how are they playing. Because if we have all that information, now we can take this information and go to a tool like Hold'em Resource Calculator and actually get some objective answers to some of our ICM related problems here. And I think what Keith is getting at is that if the players to your left who are still to act, if they have you covered, then your range is going to be very different than if the players that have you covered are to your right and they are no longer able to enter this particular hand. So that makes a lot of sense. Ben responds and says, okay, the table average is about 25 bigs. There's 2 40 big blind stacks, one other at 15, and the rest are about at the average. And it sounds like Ben is maybe the short stack at the table. He says, no obvious reads at the table, but it doesn't seem like anyone's concerned with ICM or they have very little knowledge of it. And Binkley Eric responds to that and says, with the read that nobody cares or is aware of ICM, then I think we fold almost everything and wait for the bubble to burst. To me, that means players are more likely to make big mistakes and bust and stops in spots that ICM players, ICM aware players would not. So Eric says he would just play aces and kings as a jam and fold everything else. So we've gotten a couple of responses here, and we're kind of teasing out some of the factors that we might be considering. There's a couple more comments from Keith and some other players here. And again, to do with stack position and that sort of thing. So gang, we've talked about that a little bit. We've kind of set the table here. Rob, you unmuted first. What are the kind of factors that would be on your mind here? And what would your range look like in a spot like this?
In this type of a field, when you have 15 big blinds with 10 left to the bubble, I think as long as you are playing ICM and want to make the money and are not trying to just build up a stack so you can go deep. But if you're in that spot where you want to, you want to get into the money, there's going to be a whole ton of people less than 15 big blinds when you're at this stage of the tournament. So I would be playing very, very tight. I don't think I would open jam anything. I might, raise some premium hands to see if I could get some folds. But other than that, I'm probably just really playing very, very tight and just not getting involved in waiting for those other players to make their mistakes. They're not ICM aware. They're going to make mistakes. Plus, there's going to be a lot of players that are just going to blind out.
Mm-hmm.
So with only 10 left, you can wait, especially with 15 big blinds. That's a huge stack at this point in the tournament. So I would just wait, try to get in the money, and then try to accumulate chips from there.
Yeah, I think the further you are from the button, the more inclined you are to try and build up a stack a little bit. But now that we're getting really, really close, I think that makes a lot of sense, Taylor.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Rob says here. Like 15 bigs in a huge field tournament. Like I think one thing that I've harped on for many years whenever I've, kind of talked about these spots and with ICM is like the size of the field that you're playing in matters tremendously when we're talking about approaching the bubble and like what kind of factors that has on us. When we're in a huge field tournament, like a 2,000 plus player field, just making the money is a huge jump. It's going to take a long time until we get to another spot where the difference between a few spots in terms of where you finish is like 2x of a buy-in. Like there's going to be a long time until we reach that threshold again. So we're at a very heavy ICM spot. We're also in a spot that is pretty safe for us to make the money with 15 bigs. So if this were me in this spot, I'm only opening to 2 big blinds whenever I decide I want to open. And post flop, I am playing very pot control passive to not try and get all my chips in the middle. It really isn't all that advantageous for us to double up. It really is just for us to stay alive. We want to win in a non-confrontational type of way. And we don't really want to just be risking all our chips and are putting ourselves at risk of elimination. So that's how I'm approaching these spots. Everything that Keith and others post in there, very, very correct observations. When we start getting past that initial level, is like, okay, what are the other stacks behind us? Because they might be under more ICM pressure than us, and allows us to take different types of actions that would deviate from what I just said. Because you could definitely have, you know, a 6 big blind and a 7 big blind stack behind us, and they're the only ones left to act. In which case, I'm probably just jamming because I want them to feel all that ICM pressure. But given that we have 15, we're likely under a lot of ICM pressure. So you start kind of at that high level, and then kind of think about some of the other factors that are in there. But like, this is not a spot we want to bust. So take whatever actions you can to not bust here.
Chris?
Yeah, and I agree with everybody. You know, I think I'm exclusively opening as well. I like what everyone has said here. The only part that I wanted to tease out from that I might disagree with from what Eric wrote was he kind of advocated for getting even tighter because when you're up against opponents who are not ICM aware. And I get where that's coming from, because I get that we're gonna up our variance and up our sort of like when we're up against, because you know, if they're just gonna like jam it in with 10-7 of spades or something when we've got, you know, whatever, like they're gonna get a lot of folds with those kinds of actions, and they probably shouldn't be doing that, right? But at the same time, I think we are actually, those types of opponents are going to be advantageous in terms of what they're taking away. Like they start to, their equity starts to be distributed around the rest of the table. And for the most part, it's fine to sit back and let the fireworks happen and just sort of like, okay, I'll just take my 15 big blinds and ride off into the money and then go from there. But I think it is probably too tight to say I'm only playing aces and kings here, even amidst that. And I think you want to potentially take it. If you're telling me that this player is, you know, nobody's aware and they're going to be getting into the pot versus my pocket queens with like 10-7 of spades, I want to be in that pot. I don't want to open fold queens. So I think we've got to rein that in, even if we're up against players who, it's frustrating. Sometimes we'll lose to them, right? When they shouldn't have even been in there in the first place, and that can be very frustrating. But I think we can't back down that much.
So how much of it, Chris, for you comes down to the player type? Because it sounds like you're saying that if they're not ICM aware, but they're still going to play small pots like passively, then that's not the end of the world for us to sort of play some pots with them. But if they're not ICM aware and they're like aggressive players that like to take aggressive actions, you know, ICM poker is one of these weird spots where you usually in most competitions, if your opponent is making mistakes, they're the only one that pays the price for those mistakes. But in ICM poker, in tournament poker, their mistakes can also cost you a lot of money, and they can kind of take you down with them in a way that's not common in other endeavors like this. So
Yeah.
because I feel what you're saying, but I feel this pull towards Eric's position as well, which is just like, I mostly want them to just make those mistakes with other people and drag them down.
Yeah, I think you absolutely do. I don't know. And you know, you can, I think you will consistently, more consistently make the money with the approach of just kind of like sitting back and I'm just going to play aces and kings here. But I think you want to be able to take some of your stronger holdings in this situation, your ace kings, your queens, your jacks. And I mean, I don't know how I couldn't open them here.
Right. Because they're also blocking a
Yeah.
lot of good hands, so they're going to get a lot of folds
Well,
there too. Sorry, Rob.
yeah, I think yeah, we want to open those hands. And I think what Eric was pointing at is he's thinking in terms of 15 big blinds, the only thing you're going to do is go all in. You're not opening. So if you're only shoving or folding, then yes, aces and kings should be the only two hands in that range, right? In that bucket. But I do agree with Chris, even with aces or kings, queens, jacks, ace, king, ace, queen, those types of hands, I'm still going to want to open against the types of players that can fold, right? Because the idea is still with those big hands to steal the blinds. That's still an opportunity to steal the blinds because that's a huge percentage of your stack that's taking those blinds. And then what Taylor said is post flop, you play very carefully. You play very passively. You don't get, unless you flop the absolute nuts, you need to play it very slowly. And we talked about this before when we talk ICM. Big bets become small bets. Small bets become checks, so forth and so on. Raises become calls, calls become folds. So you keep that in mind when you're going post flop. And like Taylor said, play very passively and don't try to introduce a lot of variance. But there's still opportunities to steal blinds, which can make a huge impact on your chip stack. And then if you get played back at, raised or whatever, you can make that decision at that time to just fold and wait for a better spot.
Yeah, and if the players that are still to act are going to be relatively straightforward players, then I think you don't have to worry about opening ace queen and like having to fold or like, making second pair on the flop and then having to fold post flop. What you really want to avoid is getting bluffed off even a small pot in spots like this where people are applying pressure on you. And but again, I guess those aren't the ICM aware players, are they? So that does come into it. But I like what you guys are saying here. Like, this is a pot control spot. This is where we want to be playing small pots, winning small pots, not putting our entire tournament life on the line. We'd prefer not to lose even two big blinds at this point, but that's not in the same category of catastrophe as actually going bust. So the question that Ben opened with was sort of, what do our ranges look like here? So Chris, it sounds like you're advocating for having an opening range, and you talked sort of about like ace king, ace queen, jacks plus. Is that your opening range, or would you have other hands in that opening range? 15 big blinds, middle position.
Mine's even wider than that, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm going down to nines, maybe eights. I'm taking a lot of suited aces down to probably depends. That one's a little questionable. Suited broadways, probably like king queen suited. That might be the I probably am not doing like a king 10 suited. I would say probably not. King jack suited is kind of like, I don't know. But I it's wider than definitely aces or kings.
Yeah, I was getting a bit worried when we were kind of talking about that before. I was like, oh man, like, does everyone think like you have to play extremely tight in this spot? To like high level kind of talk about it, like I think I might cut off like 25% of my normal like opening range. So if I was previously playing 20% of hands, I might only play like 15% or somewhere around there. So like that would kind of apply the whole way through as I go through there. And then, like I mentioned before, like there are other factors that would change that. Like, this is assuming we're opening into like a big blind that covers us and would probably be aware of putting ICM pressure on us. Then I think like I take that action. But like I said before, if it's like short stacks behind us and we're the only one left to act, now all of a sudden like I'm not shrinking my range, I'm growing my range. So it's like all those things that you have to be aware of within these ICM situations. But I think what Chris was talking about was kind of close to what I was thinking. I was like, I think pocket eights is probably the bottom of my range when we talk about some of those spots. And then like you kind of get into those, probably just stay away from offsuit combos of a lot of like Broadway things, probably still play the suited combos of them, so on and so forth. So yeah, no, I think that sounded about right for me.
Rob?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from both Chris and Taylor is we're playing a very linear range here. We're not doing a lot of polarizing. We're not doing a lot of bluffing or semi-bluffing. We're playing our premium hands, and we're playing a very tight linear range, but we're still playing enough hands to put pressure on the people behind us without committing our entire stack. There's no reason to just open jam anything at this point, because if if people are not ICM aware, they're going to call with a lot of garbage, and face it, variance sucks, right? even if you jam aces, somebody calls you with pocket jacks or even 9-10 suited,
Sure.
thinking that's a pretty hand, let's call. And then they hit 9 and 10, and then you're out of the tournament. So it's not worth your while to just have that mindset. 15 big blinds, I need to jam or fold. You can open a tight linear range and get folds to help improve your stack.
Yeah, Chris?
Can I ask a question of the group here? So Ben sent later in this post, he sent in the hand history from the hand. And it turns out, although he didn't mention this in the original post, this is a PKO. And this is one of the things I'm starting to play a few more PKOs, but I think I'm much more studied in traditional tournaments. But this is the exact spot that I find like you have opposite incentives, right? ICM's putting this pressure on you to sort of shrink your range, but PKOs sort of incentivize you to widen your range because not all the prize money is available after the bubble. There is prize money available for every knockout that happens. And so when those two things are sort of push-pulling each other or whatever, which wins?
Well, for me, I love knockouts. I love bounty tournaments. I think it's a better fit for my style of play. For me, it really, really, really depends on who covers who. Like I know it does in the typical ICM spot as well, but if I am covered by the other players left to act in a knockout tournament, they just have more incentive to call me when I shove, or to even get involved with hands with me when I open. So they're going to be doing that lighter than they would be ordinarily. So you're more prone to getting to showdown in spots like this, which is a problem. So that does limit how wide you can open, because you're not going to get those folds nearly as often when you're the short stack. So I think, but again, do they know that they're in a knockout tournament? Just like some players aren't that ICM aware, some players might not be thinking about like the real strategy behind the bounty element of it as well. But I'm much more inclined to be shoving with real premiums to get called by second best hands, because people, like I say, people are more incentivized to make that call. Taylor, did you have something?
Yeah, I also went and looked at what Ben posted. The thing that doesn't change anything for me here based off what he posted is we only have one person at the table covered here. Otherwise, everyone else covers us. So we essentially play as if it's like a normal tournament, not a PKO. However, everyone else is going to play as if it is a PKO. So that tells me like the bubble is going to go significantly quicker in this tournament compared to just a normal standard payout non-bounty tournament, which makes me even more incentivized to like play tight, don't bust, like don't get into trouble because this bubble is not going to take long. And then after the bubble bursts, now all of a sudden like I'm looking for all those like bounty spots because we made the money and we're trying to chip up. and if we can get a bounty all at the same time, like now all of a sudden that like changes the entire dynamic of the post bubble burst time frame like of the tournament. So I'm playing tight here to try and save my stack and my situation for some of those situations later. So there is the general like pull of like play a little bit wider, try and get bounties, all that type of stuff. But you have to have a stack for that to apply.
Yep, I like that. One of the questions that, oh, sorry, Rob, you jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm going to call out Ben right here. You look at the hand, and what happened was two big stacks got in against each other, and they both had ace king, I believe, is what I saw. And he
Yeah,
had pocket eights and would have won the hand.
Right.
So is that where the question came from? The fact that, wow, if I would have jammed and they called me, I could have tripled up.
Right. Is he
I'm just going
feeling
to call out Ben on that little spot.
he's just
but
feeling
I'm-
that remorse?
I'm gonna call him out because I think he played the hand perfectly. He opened
Well, he
to
did,
a min
yes.
open. The two other stacks behind him jammed, and then he folded and just got out of the way. Like that's exactly what you need to do in that
Yes.
spot. You do not want to risk yourself. So I
Oh,
think
I
he played
agree.
it perfectly. I'm giving him a hand. Like nice job.
I definitely agree. But I wonder if he would have asked the question, if
Right.
he wouldn't have won the hand if he had stayed in.
No.
That's
Rob,
all
just,
I'm saying.
Just say good job. Don't bring that like negative tone into it. Just say, hey, nice
Oh,
job.
I can do
Ben.
this. I follow I follow Ben on Fridays and Saturdays on his Twitch stream. I can give him shit whenever I want.
So that was one of the other questions that I had, was, so what does our range look like for opening and then calling a 3-bet, like calling a shove? So Ben does mention that in his original question, which is, given that these players are going to cover us, and if we do have this opening range that's a 2x open, when we do get shoved on, which it's gonna happen a non-trivial percentage of the time, what hands do we want to have in that range? And I guess the question is really getting at, if we're only going to be calling off with aces and kings, then does that mean that we really should be tightening up that pre-flop range even more because we can't defend against 3-bets adequately? Taylor, you're shaking your head. Is this just throw that out the door? And
right, like you're not going to get shoved on every single time that you open. You're going to get called and you're going to get everyone to fold some of the times. And like that's the point of those opens. Like you're not just opening and then calling off to a jam with 100% of your range. Like there's never situations within poker that you do that. So yeah, you just have to be willing to go, hey, this is a good hand, but not a great hand. It's worth an open, but it's not worth me risking my entire chip stack for. So that's exactly how I'm going to play it.
so what's your calling range in this spot then, Taylor? Assuming you've got the same opening range that you would prescribe and you're shoved on by someone that has you covered, what are the hands that you're calling?
I think if it's just one person shoving into us and depends on their stack and like how much pressure they're on under themselves versus how much they're potentially just putting on us. Starting point of, I don't know, calling with jacks plus and ace queen suited and ace king. And then if it's two people that jammed into us, like in this situation, I'm getting nervous about queens even, and might only call off with kings and aces. Because again, that min cash is just like so important.
And I think we have to.
I love that because the equities get so spread out when you're, three-handed as opposed to heads up. The equities are so spread out that you have to be even tighter when there's two people that cover you that are already all in.
Chris?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, with what I'm actually probably even going down to tens, but that might be a mistake. But otherwise I agree, ace queen suited, ace king, and then if two people shove, though, that second shove is so strong in this situation. That I mean, even kings there, I think you could fold kings. in that exact situation.
Mhm.
I don't know I'm capable of it, but I think you could.
Yeah, you'd be well, some of our listeners might not be that surprised, but you'd be surprised how often an ace comes up. Like they don't have, like they can have ace X, and it doesn't matter what their kicker is because there's a non-trivial chance an ace is going to come in one of those 5 community cards. So there's a big difference between aces and kings. Let me put it that way. Pre-flop when it comes to a spot like that. So what about what if we were a little bit shorter? You guys are talking about we've got a 2x opening range here. We're not under that much pressure. How many fewer big blinds do we have to have in our stack before we feel more handcuffed to a shove or fold dynamic in this particular setup? So Chris, you were saying if we lose 2 big blinds right now, it's not the end of the world. So I'm guessing like even off a 13 big blind stack, we might have a 2x opening range here. When do you guys stop being comfortable with having that opening range and it's just now we're just going to be shoving or folding? Chris, no one's unmuted, but I'm going to put Chris on the spot because he mentioned this earlier.
Well, okay. So this is getting me out on a plank of uncharted water, but I have been thinking a lot about limping ranges in these spots. So the fact that you mentioned us getting shorter, I don't think it's exclusively, especially in these high ICM spots. I think we can start to incorporate some limps. And I could be wildly off and wrong, but I think that then opens up our ability to, because it's still like, okay, so we've got 10 big blinds or 9 big blinds, right? Like we still don't necessarily in this situation want to commit our stack. Like it's not very exciting to do. And so, but if we put out a min open here, that's like, a fifth of our stack that's going into the middle. And that's really painful to fold away. And so that's where I think we can start to, I mean, that limping range should not be wide and it should not be like, oh, I get to limp so I can just, but it is a potential strategy when we're getting lower here and we're in high leverage ICM spots that we can start to think about. And I've always thought of limping as just like, oh, that's terrible. They're a fish. That's a terrible play. And I'm starting to, and I've been playing in some like lower kind of stakes tournaments. I've been trying to employ this to try to learn from it and think about it so that I can sort of build it into my game a bit, but I think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely coming into vogue a little bit. It's like late position limping off small stacks is a subject that that people are talking about. Taylor?
Yeah, if we're still talking about like this same exact spot, I might, if I'm short enough, I might just fold like everything but aces and just like never be jamming, essentially, just because like, again, like what's a double up going to do for you versus, just trying to get into the money. Like we have to be aware of those types of spots. I do really like the consideration of limping. I have not thought about this. It puts me a bit into uncharted water, but like Chris is making some good points in terms of like, don't commit too much from your stack, so on and so forth. And like how to be balanced with that, I'm not entirely sure, but it is pretty darn scary, especially if you include aces into that limping range.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to do that with aces as well, like that becomes really scary and hard to play against for your opponents. When a short stack limps and you're like, hey, I should be able to put on ICM pressure, but what are they limping with? Like, is this just trapping me? Like, what's going on? And then you can sometimes kind of throw them off from the slightly unconventional play.
Yeah, I like that. And I think you have to limit the number of times you do it in that setting, because even if you just limp like 4 or 5 times, that's enough for players to know that you don't always have aces or kings or something. Chris, is this like a what am I asking here? Like
This is
like
a
it-
heavy, for me, this is a heavy ace X, probably suited ace X strategy that includes like aces, kings, queens, maybe, and then some suited aces as well. But it is not nearly as the shorter we get, the narrower this gets. To the point where I think we could reach a point where it is just aces.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, you're also turning down that fold equity, like you're removing the possibility of just winning the pot pre-flop, which is an important, valuable thing to be able to do, like being able to put two and a half, or you know, roughly two and a half big blinds in your pocket. That's a significant portion of your stack. So you're that's the trade-off, I guess here.
Yeah,
sorry,
but you really don't have a lot of fold equity if you're sitting there, under 10 big blinds.
right.
There's very few bigger stacks that are going to be very, threatened by that, especially if they're not ICM aware, and especially in a PKO. So, being able to limp in and then have somebody call you with one of the hands like Chris talked about, and then being able to hit the flop big. I mean, you still have an opportunity to make money. But at the same time, you are taking away the opportunity of losing more than one big blind.
Yeah, so I guess you really just you have to reconcile yourself to playing more post flop, because the hands are going to go post flop more often in a limped pot when there is no opportunity for other people to fold. So that doesn't mean you're going to get to showdown more often, although I think that's probably also true. But you are definitely going to have to play more flops and post flop plays. So that's its own little thing. Getting back to Ben's specific scenario, I did some quick math. If I think there's got to be about 40 tables left at this point, with 10 players to bust. So we've done a lot of sort of interesting strategic abstract conversation about other scenarios where we might employ some other techniques, but I feel like this bubble is going to burst very quickly. I don't know how many hands it's going to take, but when you've got this many active tables, coolers happen. Aces, are going to run into kings, and people are going to get the king high flush versus the ace high flush. Like, this stuff's going to happen. And that would incline me to tighten up again more and just like turn down a couple, plus EV spots, even if if there were only 4 tables and 10 players needed to bust. Now I think you do have some pressure to not just fold your way to it in the same way, because that could take a much longer time.
Yeah, I think in that second scenario, there is not as much ICM pressure as there is in this scenario, if you think about it.
Yeah,
If there's only 4 tables left and there's still 10 people left to go, I mean, you're not really even in an ICM spot yet.
right.
You're in that accumulation phase that Chris talked about in the last deep dive. You don't really get to the bubble, until you got 1, 2, maybe 3 players left. More likely 2 players left before you really feel a lot of ICM pressure, I think.
Yeah, and that's Eric made this really good point that we mentioned right at the top of the show, that at this point only 2.7 of the remaining field needs to bust before the bubble is reached. And so that is going to happen a lot. That's going to happen very quickly in these large field tournaments. So I think that's a great way to be thinking about it. Is there anything else we can tell our man Ben about this? We did get to see the results. I think if he's listening, I'm sure he is, he'll feel like he got a pat on the back, because he did open with 8s, which was at about the bottom range of the hands that our group here was advising us to open. And he did fold to the shove over shove. And Eric makes the point in the last comment here in the post, saying that this is exactly the big ICM mistake that the other stacks should not be making, having these 2 stacks that have a lot of chips going up against each other this close to the bubble. But that's what happens in fields of players that don't really understand ICM. And so you can use your knowledge as a weapon here. And I think people don't appreciate how valuable folding can be. Like, folding is a weapon. Folding, if you can avoid giving other people chips that someone else in your spot would not be able to avoid, like a chip saved is a chip earned. And you can, fight your way to the money just by giving up some of these marginal spots. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, if we just talk about just this, not from Ben's perspective, but from the other player's perspective.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so what happens in the hand that he shares is he's got pocket eights. He min opens to pocket eights. I believe this is the button. The button shoves 45 big blinds over that min open. And in a PKO and with 10 left before the money, with a big blind that covers him, who calls with ace king, and he loses with ace queen.
Yeah.
And you don't need to shove 45 blinds there to achieve what you're trying to achieve with ace queen.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, he'd have the same effect on Ben's play by just putting in 15 big blinds, which covers Ben, but doesn't expose himself to this other player to his left, who's a big...
or even 5.
Yeah,
I guess
good point.
It's with a PKO. You probably want to put him in, but you could even I don't know. I think that's just a disaster in this spot.
Yeah, I think so too. So don't be the one making that big mistake, folks. This is why ICM, I mean, if you're a tournament player, ICM is a crucial element, and it's a difficult thing to practice. It's not a difficult thing to study, but it's a difficult thing to practice. And so you really have to get it into your brain. Where are those starting points? Where are the opening ranges? What are the continuing ranges for various chip stacks? And you just have to put yourself in this position and feel the pressure and know what it feels like to apply that pressure to other people. And yeah, it's just one of those things that it just comes with practice. It comes with experience. And other than that, I think just keep writing into the forums and listening to podcasts and doing the book study with Rob. Rob's picked up quite a few little tips along the way about dealing with spots like this from various different books that we've looked at. It's great picking his brain when we get into these spots. All right, folks, was there anything else that we should tell Ben before we rally ourselves out of here? It doesn't look like it. Well, Ben Enslow, Jammin 96, thanks for your contribution to our forums. And of course, I have to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. We couldn't do what we do without them. Rob, Chris, and Taylor, it's always so lovely to talk to you fellas on a Monday night. And thanks to you, the listeners. We couldn't do it without you, that's for sure. So come back next week. And that's it for this week of the Rec Poker Podcast. Have a great night, everybody.